I stood at the back of the room, watching a complete stranger weep over my husband's open casket. She wore a black haute couture dress that likely cost more than my car, but it was the ring on her shaking finger that froze my blood. It was a 3-carat sapphire, the very same heirloom he swore was stolen at gunpoint 3 years ago. I did not come here to grieve. I came to audit the books of his life. My name is Mallory, and as a director of risk audit, my life is governed by probability and verifiable data. When the phone rang at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, the data points shifted violently. The voice on the other end was clinical, professional, and devastating. They told me Derek was gone, a massive stroke. He had collapsed in the lobby of a hotel in Chicago during what he had called a crucial investment conference. I did not cry. My hand tightened around the receiver, knuckles turning white, but my eyes remained dry. The tears did not come because the equation did not make sense. Derek was only 36 years old. He was a man who obsessively tracked his macros, drank green sludge for breakfast, and bragged about his resting heart rate. Men like that do not simply drop dead of strokes in hotel lobbies. I went into autopilot. I called the funeral home in Chicago to arrange for his transport back to New York, prepared to put the cost on my already maxed-out credit card. That has already been taken care of, ma'am, the funeral director said, his voice dripping with confused, polite deference. The family has arranged for a service in Greenwich, Connecticut. I am the family, I said, my voice sharp. I am his wife. I understand. But, well, the arrangements are made. The body is already en route to the private residence. Suspicion is a cold thing. It starts in the gut and spreads to the chest. Derek had spent the last 5 years lamenting the near insolvency of his tech startup. I was the one who paid the mortgage on our cramped apartment. I was the one who paid the electric bill, the grocery bill, and the minimum payments on his credit cards. He was always just one investor's meeting away from a breakthrough, always just one check away from paying me back. I got into my 10-year-old sedan, the one with the dent in the rear bumper that we could not afford to fix, and drove north. The address led me away from the city, past the suburbs I knew, and into the realm of old money. Greenwich, as I drove, my mind replayed our last conversation. It was 3 days ago. He had looked frantic, his eyes wide and desperate. Mal, I need $5,000, he had said, gripping my shoulders. It's for the server fees. If I don't pay by midnight, the whole platform goes down. Please, this is the last time. I swear. I had transferred the money from my emergency savings. He had kissed my forehead, whispered a thank you, and left. That was the last time I saw him alive. I pulled up to a wrought iron gate that looked like the entrance to a fortress. A security guard in a dark suit stepped out, holding a clipboard. Name, he asked, not bothering to look me up and down. Mallory, I said. I am Derek's wife. He scanned the list, his finger tracing down the paper. He frowned. I don't have a Mallory on the guest list. I can't let you in. My husband was dead inside that house, and I was being treated like a party crasher. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling with a rage I could barely suppress. I navigated to my files and pulled up the PDF scan of our marriage certificate. I shoved the screen in his face. Let me in, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Or I will have the police here in 10 minutes to discuss why you are keeping a widow from her husband's body. The guard hesitated, looked at the document, and then pressed a button. The gates swung open. I parked my rusting car between a Bentley and a Porsche. Walking up the stone steps to the main entrance, the scent hit me first. Imported white lilies. Thousands of them. The air was thick with their cloying perfume. Inside, a chamber orchestra was playing something soft and mournful. Waiters circulated with trays of crystal flutes filled with vintage champagne. I stood in the foyer, clutching my purse. When we got married at the courthouse, Derek had refused to buy flowers. He had called them a waste of capital. He had refused a reception because we needed to invest in his vision. Yet here, surrounded by strangers in silk and velvet, money was being burned as if it were oxygen. I looked down at my gray pencil skirt and sensible heels. I looked like the help. People glanced at me, their eyes sliding over my outfit with disdain before returning to their conversations. I was a ghost at my own husband's funeral, an anomaly in a dataset that was rapidly revealing itself to be a lie. I pushed through the wall of mourners, my eyes locked on the mahogany casket at the front of the room. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, a cloying mixture that made my stomach churn. I needed to see him. I needed to see the face of the man who had kissed me goodbye 3 days ago and promised me that everything was going to be fine. When I finally reached the front, the breath left my lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. Derek lay there, his face pale and composed, his hands folded over his chest, but it was not his face that stopped my heart. It was his clothes. He was wearing the charcoal gray Armani suit I had bought him for our 5th wedding anniversary last year. I stared at the lapel, remembering the day he came home, looking devastated, claiming the dry cleaner had lost it. I remembered marching down to that shop, screaming at the bewildered manager while Derek stood behind me, playing the victim. He had lied to my face without blinking. He had let me fight a stranger for a suit that was hanging in some secret closet the entire time. I tore my eyes away from him and looked to the spot where the widow should stand. I expected to find an empty space, or perhaps his mother. Instead, I saw her. She was young, perhaps 24 years old, with hair the color of spun gold and skin that looked like porcelain. Her name, I would soon learn, was Vanessa. She wore a black dress that fit her slender frame perfectly, a piece of high fashion that spoke of effortless wealth. She was weeping, her shoulders shaking with a grief that seemed performative yet undeniably raw. She looked fragile, tragic, and beautiful. I stood there in my scuffed heels and wrinkled blazer, feeling like a coarse intruder in a Renaissance painting. Then, Vanessa raised her left hand to wipe a tear from her cheek. The movement was slow, theatrical. The light from the crystal chandelier above caught the object on her ring finger, sending a fracture of blue light straight into my eyes. I froze. It was a vintage sapphire ring, deep midnight blue, surrounded by a halo of small diamonds, 3 carats. It was my grandmother's ring, 3 years ago. Derek had come home from the gym, pale and trembling. He told me he had been mugged at gunpoint in the parking lot. He said they took his wallet and the ring, which he had foolishly taken with him to get resized as a surprise for me. I remembered holding him that night as he sobbed into my shoulder, his body shaking with what I thought was post-traumatic stress. I had comforted him. I had told him the ring did not matter, that his life was what mattered. To soothe his wounded pride, I had taken the last of my bonus money to buy him a luxury watch. He had not been mugged. He had stolen it. He had stolen my family history to court a 24-year-old heiress. The shock evaporated, replaced instantly by a molten, blinding rage. It roared in my ears, drowning out the chamber music. I did not care about the funeral. I did not care about the guests. I was going to march up there, rip that ring off her finger, and scream the truth until the windows shattered. I took a step forward, my hands curling into fists. Suddenly, a hand clamped around my wrist. It was cold, bony, and surprisingly strong. I whipped my head around. It was Sylvia, Derek's mother, the woman whose nursing home bills I had paid for the last 4 years, the woman whose hip surgery I had financed by refinancing my car. Sylvia was not looking at her dead son. She was looking at me, and her eyes were hard, devoid of any warmth or gratitude. She did not look like a grieving mother. She looked like a guard dog protecting a vault. "Let go of me," I hissed, trying to wrench my arm away. Sylvia tightened her grip, her fingernails digging into my skin. She leaned in close, her breath smelling of peppermint and decay. Don't you dare make a scene, Sylvia whispered, her voice a harsh rasp. You need to keep your mouth shut, right now. He stole my ring, I said, my voice rising. He lied to me. And you knew Sylvia's expression did not waver. There was no apology in her face, only a cold calculation. She pulled me harder, forcing me to turn my back on the weeping girl at the casket. She doesn't know anything, Sylvia said, her voice dropping to a menacing murmur. And she is pregnant. The word hit me with the force of a physical blow to the chest. Pregnant. For 2 years, Derek and I had lived in the sterile, heartbreaking purgatory of IVF clinics. I remembered the bruises on my stomach from the hormone injections, the crushing weight of negative pregnancy tests, and the way Derek would look at me across the dinner table with a mixture of pity and resentment. He had told me, time and again, that the problem was me. It's your stress levels. Mal, he would say, sighing as he checked his phone. Your body is just too hostile. You need to relax like I do. And now, here was this stranger, this golden girl, carrying the child my husband had claimed he was desperate for, while I stood there, barren and betrayed. Before I could scream, Sylvia yanked me into a narrow alcove behind a large arrangement of white roses, hidden from the main hall. Her grip was ironclad. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the woman beneath the frail mother act I had bought for years. She was not frail. She was vicious. Listen to me very carefully, Sylvia hissed, her eyes darting to make sure no one was watching. Vanessa is the daughter of Arthur Sterling. You know who that is, don't you? The real estate mogul. Derek. Well, Derek was finally happy. For the first time in his life, he was with someone who could give him the standing he deserved. I stared at her, my mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. You never understood him, Sylvia continued, smoothing the fabric of her silk dress. You only knew how to clip coupons and stifle his dreams. You made him feel small. Vanessa, she made him feel like a king. She gave him the life he was meant for. I looked at her dress. It was St. John, easily $1,000. I looked at the pearl necklace around her neck. Real pearls. The realization washed over me like ice water, the monthly transfers, the $3,000 I sent her every month for her specialized heart medication, the extra money for her rent at the assisted living facility because she claimed the state-funded one was full of mold. She wasn't sick. She was funding a high society wardrobe to play the part of the dowager matriarch for Vanessa's billionaire family. I had been paying for the costume she wore to help my husband cheat on me. You took my money, I whispered, my voice trembling. I worked double shifts during tax season to pay for your heart pills. You don't even have a heart condition, do you? Sylvia scoffed. A short, ugly sound. Don't be dramatic. I did what a mother has to do to ensure her son's success. Look, if you are smart, you will turn around and walk out that door. Go back to your little apartment. If you keep your mouth shut and let Derek rest in peace as the man these people think he was, maybe I can send you a small check from the life insurance. 5,000, 10,000. Call it a severance package. I looked past Sylvia's shoulder into the main room. I saw men in expensive suits shaking their heads solemnly, discussing Derek. I recognized one face from a business magazine. These were not the scrappy startup founders Derek claimed to be mentoring. These were the whales. These were Vanessa's family friends, wealthy investors who believed Derek was a tech genius, likely because he was using the money he stole from me to buy the right shoes and the right drinks. A scream built in my throat, hot and acidic. I wanted to tear this entire farce down. I wanted to grab a bottle of champagne and smash it against the wall. But then, something clicked. The scream died, in its place. A cold, Familiar sensation took over. It was the feeling I got when I opened a ledger and saw numbers that did not add up. It was the icy clarity of an auditor sensing fraud. Screaming would make me look like the crazy ex-wife. Screaming would get me thrown out by security. Screaming would solve nothing. I did not need a scene. I needed evidence. I needed to document the liabilities. I needed to balance the sheet. I took a deep breath and pulled my arm from Sylvia's grasp. I forced my facial muscles to relax, masking the rage behind a veneer of shock. I think I'm going to be sick, I stammered, putting a hand to my forehead. I need to use the restroom, please. Then I'll go. I can't drive like this. Sylvia eyed me suspiciously, then gave a curt nod. The powder room is down the hall, second door on the left. Be quick. If you are not gone in 10 minutes, I will have security drag you out. I turned and walked away, not toward the restroom, but toward the side of the room. My eyes scanned the space, locking onto a small table near the entrance that had been set up as a memorial shrine. Amidst framed photos of Derek on yachts and ski slopes, vacations he had supposedly taken for work, sat 2 items: his iPhone and his iPad Pro. They were placed there like holy relics of the great businessman, displayed next to a burning candle. To everyone else, they were just electronics. To me, they were the server logs of his deception. I adjusted my blazer, kept my head down, and moved toward the table. I was not a grieving widow anymore. I was an auditor, and I was going to find every single hidden transaction. I slipped the iPad Pro under my blazer, pressing the cold metal against my ribs. It was a risky move, but the room was too chaotic with new arrivals for anyone to notice the grieving widow collecting a memento. I moved toward the back of the house, away from the suffocating scent of lilies and the lies being whispered in the main hall. I found a heavy oak door that looked substantial enough to hide secrets. I pushed it open. It was a library, lined with leather-bound books that looked like they had never been opened. I closed the door behind me and locked it. The silence was immediate and heavy. I did not sit down. I went straight to the corner where the Wi-Fi router blinked rapidly. I placed the iPad on a mahogany desk and tapped the screen. The passcode prompt stared back at me. 6 digits. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, wondering if he had changed it to Vanessa's birthday. But Derek was a creature of habit, and deep down, he was lazy. I typed in my birthday. September 12th, 1991. The lock screen dissolved. He hadn't even bothered to change it. You lazy arrogant, I whispered, my voice trailing off. I did not go to the photo gallery. I went straight to the banking apps. I opened the folder marked Finance, a folder he always told me was too boring for me to worry about. I bypassed our joint account, which I knew currently had less than $500 in it, and opened an account with a bank I had never heard of. Face ID was required, but he had enabled the passcode fallback. I typed my birthday in again. Access granted. I expected to see millions. I expected to see the fruits of a successful startup. Instead, what I saw made the forensic accountant in me run cold. The balance was high, yes, but the transaction history was a bloody mess of inflows and outflows that screamed one thing: Ponzi scheme. There was no technology company. There were no servers. There was only money coming in from new investors like Vanessa's father and immediately going out to pay for a lifestyle Derek could not afford. I scrolled down, my finger trembling slightly. Hermes, $4,000. Louboutin, $1,200. The Ritz-Carlton, Paris, $6,000. I read the charges aloud, my voice sounding foreign in the quiet room. These dates matched the times he told me he was in San Francisco sleeping on a friend's couch to save money for the company. He wasn't suffering for his art. He was taking Vanessa on a European tour with the money I earned working 60-hour weeks. I switched to his email. I searched for the keyword divorce. An email from a lawyer named Stein popped up. The subject line read, "Draft decree of dissolution, ready for signature." I opened the attachment. It was a complete divorce filing, citing irreconcilable differences. The date was set for next week. He was planning to serve me the papers, kick me out of my own life, and marry Vanessa before her baby was born. But the next email was the one that made me drop into the leather chair. It was a notification from a predatory lending company. Loan approved, I read. My eyes narrowing. Principal amount, $200,000. Collateral single-family residence, Queens, New York. He had forged my signature. He had taken a second mortgage out on my house, the house I bought before I even met him to fund his wedding to another woman. He had literally bet the roof over my head on his new life. I felt a wave of nausea, but I swallowed it down. I was not a victim anymore. I was an auditor, and I had just found the smoking gun. I opened my personal cloud drive on the browser. I began uploading everything: bank statements, the forged loan documents, the divorce drafts, the receipts for the jewelry. Upload complete. The screen flashed. My hands were ice cold, but they were steady. I was done crying for him. I was done making excuses. Then, a new notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. It was an automated reminder from his life insurance provider. Action required, beneficiary change incomplete. I tapped it. The email chain opened. 3 days ago, the day he died, Derek had submitted a request to change the primary beneficiary of his $3 million policy from Mallory to Vanessa. I scanned the document. He had filled out everything. He had uploaded Vanessa's ID. But at the very bottom, where the electronic signature was required to finalize the change, the field was blank. The timestamp showed he had opened the document 4 hours before he died. He must have gotten distracted, or perhaps the stroke hit him right then. "You didn't sign it," I whispered, a dark, humorless laugh bubbling up in my throat. You didn't sign it. Legally. I was still the beneficiary. I was still the wife. And I held the keys to the kingdom he had built on a foundation of sand. I stepped out of the study, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The hallway was crowded with mourners, a sea of black wool and hushed whispers. I needed air. I needed to escape the suffocating weight of the lies I had just uncovered on that iPad. I slipped through a pair of French doors onto a stone terrace overlooking the Sound. The air was salt-heavy and cold, a sharp contrast to the perfumed warmth inside. I was not alone. Leaning against the stone balustrade was Vanessa. She was shaking, her face buried in a silk handkerchief. When she heard the door click shut, she turned, her eyes red-rimmed and wide. She looked at me, blinking through her tears, and I realized she had no idea who I was. To her, I was just another faceless guest in a cheap suit, perhaps a distant cousin or a former colleague. "I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice thick with grief. I couldn't breathe in there. Everyone keeps telling me how strong I need to be for the baby, but I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm dying. I stood frozen. Part of me wanted to unleash the fury that was boiling in my gut, but the auditor in me took over. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I walked closer, leaning against the railing a few feet away from her. "He was very loved," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Vanessa nodded frantically, desperate to share her pain. "He was the most amazing man. You know, people think he was just this brilliant investor, but he was so kind. He would give you the shirt off his back. I thought of the bank alerts on my phone, the foreclosure notices I had intercepted, the $200,000 he had stolen from my equity." "Generous," I said flatly. "He gave me this," Vanessa said, lifting her hand to show me the sapphire ring. The stones caught the fading sunlight, mocking me. "He told me the story. It belonged to his great-grandmother. She brought it over from the old country. He said he kept it in a vault for 10 years, waiting for the one woman who could truly understand his soul. He said I was the only one." I stared at the ring. My grandmother had not come from the old country. She was a school teacher from Ohio who saved for 20 years to buy that ring. She had pressed it into my palm on her deathbed, her skin paper thin, telling me to never let anyone take my worth away. "It is a beautiful story," I said, fighting the urge to rip it off her finger. "He was going to change the world," Vanessa continued, wiping her nose. "My daddy. He saw it too." Daddy is usually so skeptical. But Derek charmed him. Daddy transferred $2 million into Derek's fund just last week. He said it was an investment in our future. My stomach dropped. $2 million. Gone. Funneled into an offshore account or burned on debts I didn't even know existed yet. Derek had not just broken my heart. He was in the process of dismantling this girl's entire family fortune. $2 million, I repeated, my voice low. That is a lot of trust. He was worth it. Vanessa sobbed. He was going to take care of us. He promised. I looked at her. She was so young, so painfully naive. For a second, I felt a flicker of pity. She was a victim too. But then I remembered the mortgage papers. I remembered that while she had a billionaire father to cushion her fall, I was facing financial ruin because of the man she was mourning. I turned to her, my expression hardening. Did he ever mention? Mallory Vanessa paused, wrinkling her brow in confusion. Mallory. The name sounds familiar. Was she the old administrative assistant he fired? He told me he had some trouble with a disgruntled employee a few years ago. The pity evaporated instantly. I was the disgruntled employee. I was the old history he had rewritten. Something like that, I said, before I could ask anything else. The terrace door flew open. Sylvia marched out, her eyes locking onto me with the intensity of a predator spotting a threat. She moved with a speed that defied her age, crossing the distance between us in seconds. Vanessa, darling, Sylvia cooed, her voice sugary sweet, but her eyes drilling into mine. You shouldn't be out here in the cold. Think of the baby. She grabbed Vanessa's arm, positioning her body between us. She looked at me, her lips pressing into a thin, cruel line. This woman was just leaving, Sylvia said, her voice dropping an octave, laden with a clear threat. Weren't you? Vanessa looked at me, confused. Oh, it was nice to meet you. Thank you for listening to me. I didn't catch your name. She doesn't have time for chit-chat. Vanessa, Sylvia snapped, pulling the girl toward the door. Come inside. The lawyer is here. I watched them go, the heavy door clicking shut behind them. Sylvia thought she had won. She thought she had silenced the help. She had no idea that the disgruntled employee was about to conduct the most aggressive performance review of her life. The chairs were arranged in concentric semicircles, focusing all attention on the mahogany box that held the greatest fraud I had ever known. I sat in the very last row, hidden in the shadows of a large pillar. The room was packed with the elite of Greenwich, people who measured worth in equity and bloodlines, all of them completely fooled by a man who used to steal my loose change for vending machines. The eulogies began, and it was like watching a satire of corporate worship. First came a man who introduced himself as a venture capital partner. He spoke of Derek as a visionary and a disruptor. Derek saw things others didn't, the man said, gesturing grandly. He had an instinct for value that was simply supernatural. I looked down at the phone in my lap. The screen was dimmed, but the file was open. It was a 50-page PDF I had named Derek's actual financial statement. It contained every lie, every forged signature, and every stolen dollar. His instinct for value was actually just a predatory ability to identify insecure wealthy people, and my own gullibility. Next was Arthur Sterling, Vanessa's father. He was a large man who commanded the room effortlessly. He placed a heavy hand on the casket, looking at it with genuine affection. "I didn't just lose a business partner," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "I lost a son. When I signed over that $2 million investment last week, I wasn't betting on a company. I was betting on the man who was going to take care of my little girl and my grandchild. He was the future of this family. $2 million. I felt a phantom weight in my chest. That money was already gone, moved to the Caymans before the ink was dry. Then came Sylvia. She walked to the podium with the assistance of a cane she never used at home. She looked small, frail, and utterly devastated. It was an Oscar-worthy performance. She dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "My boy," she whispered into the microphone, creating a feedback loop of sympathy. "My poor boy. He worked so hard. He built this empire from nothing. Absolutely nothing. He grew up poor, but he had pride." She paused, looking directly at Vanessa, then scanned the room, her gaze sliding right over me in the back. "Derek was a man of honor," Sylvia continued, her voice gaining strength. "He was independent. He never asked for help. He never relied on anyone, especially not on women. He carried the weight of the world on his own shoulders because he was a true provider." The audacity took my breath away. I had paid her rent. I had paid for her groceries. I had paid for the very dress she was wearing to bury him. Buzz. My phone vibrated in my hand. I looked down at the screen. A notification from our joint bank account popped up. "Transaction declined Netflix subscription. Amount $15.99. Insufficient funds." He could not even leave enough money to pay for a movie. Yet his mother was up there canonizing him as a provider. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud break. It was the quiet, mechanical click of a switch flipping. The grief was gone. The shock was gone. In their place stood the director of risk audit. I was done listening to the fiction. It was time to present the audit findings. I stood up. The movement was sharp, deliberate. I smoothed the front of my cheap blazer. My face settled into the cold, impassive mask I wore when I had to tell a CEO that his CFO was embezzling funds. The officiant stepped back up to the microphone as Sylvia returned to her seat. "Is there anyone else?" the officiant asked, scanning the room politely. "Anyone else who wishes to share a final word about Derek?" I stepped out from behind the pillar, moving into the center aisle. My heels clicked loudly on the marble floor, cutting through the silence. "I do," I said. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the room like a wave. I saw Sylvia freeze, her hand clutching her pearls. I saw Vanessa look up, confused. I walked forward, my voice steady and projecting to the back of the room. "I am his wife," I said, "his legal wife." The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the lungs of every person present. A murmur started in the back and rolled forward like a gathering wave. Sylvia scrambled out of her seat, her cane forgotten, her face twisted into a mask of pure panic. She lunged toward the aisle, her hands reaching out as if she could physically drag me back into the shadows. I stopped walking. I did not flinch. I turned my head slowly and locked eyes with her. I channeled every late night I had worked, every dollar I had sacrificed, and every lie I had swallowed into that single look. It was a glare of such concentrated fury that it physically stopped her in her tracks. She froze, her mouth opening and closing, the fear of total exposure paralyzing her limbs. I stepped onto the raised platform. I did not touch the microphone. Instead, I reached for the laptop that was running the sentimental slideshow of Derek's fabricated life. I pulled the HDMI cable out of the computer and plugged it directly into my phone. The image of Derek smiling on a rented sailboat vanished. The screen flickered once, then settled on a high-contrast, black-and-white spreadsheet. A collective gasp ripped through the room. It was not a photo. It was a personal balance sheet. Projected 10 feet high behind the casket were the columns I had just finalized. Under the header income, the number 0 was repeated for every month for the last 5 years. Under sources of capital, the list was brutal and clear. Mallory's salary, Mallory's credit cards, predatory loans. Derek was not an entrepreneur, I said, my voice steady, calm, and projecting to the back of the room without the need for amplification. He was a bad debt. He was a liability that I have been carrying on my balance sheet for far too long. I swiped the screen of my phone. The slide changed. 2 images appeared side by side. On the left was a screenshot of a text message from Derek, sent 3 days ago at 2 in the afternoon. It read, "Baby, please. I need $5,000 for the server fees. It is life or death for the company." On the right was a credit card receipt, time-stamped 1 hour later. The location was a high-end boutique in Manhattan. The item description read, "Black silk gown, custom fit." The total was exactly $5,000. He did not need server space, I said, looking directly at the front row. He needed a dress for his girlfriend. Vanessa let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. She looked down at the black dress she was wearing as if the fabric had suddenly caught fire. She clawed at the silk, her eyes wide with horror. Beside her, Arthur Sterling stood up so abruptly that his heavy chair toppled backward with a deafening crash. His face had turned a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. I did not stop. I turned my gaze to Sylvia, who was now shrinking into her seat, trying to make herself invisible. "And my mother-in-law," I said, my voice dripping with cold disdain. "The woman who just stood here and told you all that her son was a self-made man who never took a dime from a woman." I swiped again. The screen filled with a cascading list of bank transfers. Sylvia rent, Sylvia heart medication, Sylvia allowance. She has been living on the salary of a risk auditor for 4 years while pretending to be a wealthy matriarch. I stated, she knew he was married. She knew I was paying for her apartment, and she helped him spend my money to court a new victim. I looked around the opulent hall, taking in the flowers, the orchestra, the champagne. "This house," I continued, pointing to the vaulted ceiling. "The champagne you are drinking, the Armani suit he is wearing in that casket. It was all paid for with fraud." I pulled up the next document, the one that made my blood boil, the mortgage papers. "He forged my signature to mortgage my home," I said, the words cutting through the air like a knife. "He stole the equity in the roof over my head to pay for this wedding." Finally, I looked straight at Arthur Sterling. The billionaire looked like he was having a heart attack, his chest heaving. "And the $2 million you invested last week?" "Sir," I asked, my tone almost professional. "It is not in a tech fund. I tracked the wire transfer 10 minutes ago. It was moved immediately to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Derek was not building a legacy. He was planning to run away the moment the ring was on her finger." The silence that had followed my presentation shattered like glass dropped on concrete. The room, once filled with respectful murmurs and classical music, erupted into a cacophony of shouting and accusations. The men in the expensive suits, the ones Derek had introduced as strategic partners, were suddenly revealing their true colors. They were not partners. They were creditors. They were sharks who had smelled blood in the water. He told me my returns were guaranteed. One man shouted, his face purple with rage, "Where is my money? Where is the capital?" Arthur Sterling was already on his phone, barking orders with the ruthlessness of a man who had destroyed competitors for sport. "Get the legal team, now, and call the police commissioner. I don't care if he is at lunch. Tell him I have been defrauded of $2 million. I want this place sealed tight." In the center of the storm stood Vanessa. She looked as if her entire world had dissolved into mist. She turned slowly toward Sylvia, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. You knew," Vanessa stammered, her voice trembling so hard it was barely audible. You told me he was single." You told me I was the love of his life. Did you know he had a wife, Sylvia? Cornered and desperate, tried to grab Vanessa's hand, but the girl recoiled as if burned. Vanessa, darling, listen to me, Sylvia pleaded, her eyes darting around the room frantically. She is lying. She is just a crazy ex-girlfriend who wants money. You know how much Derek loved you. You know. I did not let her finish. I tapped the screen of my phone one last time. The speakers, which had just broadcast the financial ruin of Derek's life, now played a clear, high-quality audio recording. It was the conversation from 10 minutes ago, captured perfectly by the voice memo app I had activated the moment Sylvia grabbed my arm. Vanessa is the daughter of a billionaire. Derek was finally happy. Vanessa can give him the life he deserves, whereas you only knew how to make him save money. Sylvia's voice boomed through the hall, undeniable and damning. The color drained from Vanessa's face. She looked at Sylvia with pure revulsion. You sold him to me, Vanessa whispered, clutching her stomach. You pimp. You pimped out your own son. I stepped down from the podium and walked toward them. The crowd parted for me, a mixture of fear and awe in their eyes. I stopped directly in front of Vanessa. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I simply reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the police report from 3 years ago. Read it, I said calmly. Vanessa took the paper with shaking hands. Her eyes scanned the text. Item reported stolen vintage sapphire ring, 3 carats, platinum setting. That is my grandmother's ring, I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the room. He told me a gunman took it. Instead, he kept it in a drawer to give to his next mark. You can keep the man. You can keep the lies. You can even keep the debt if you want it. But the ring is mine. Vanessa looked down at her hand. The ring that had been a symbol of her fairy tale was now a shackle of humiliation. She let out a choked sob, a sound of pure misery. She yanked the ring off her finger, scratching her skin in her haste. Take it, she screamed, thrusting it at me. Take it away, I don't. Oh, God! She bent over and retched, vomiting onto the polished marble floor, her expensive black dress ruined. Her father rushed to her side, shielding her from the cameras that some of the guests had started to pull out. At that moment, the heavy oak doors of the manor burst open. Blue and red lights flashed against the walls. The police had arrived. Nobody move. An officer shouted, "This is a crime scene." The officers began to cordon off the area, moving toward the podium where the laptop was still connected. In the center of the chaos lay Derek. He was still in his casket, still wearing the stolen suit, but he had become completely irrelevant. No one was looking at him. No one was crying for him. He was just a piece of evidence, a prop in a Ponzi scheme that had finally collapsed. Sylvia let out a shriek as an officer approached her. It's her fault, she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. She is evil. She came here to destroy us. She is desecrating the dead. But no one was listening to her. The angry creditors, realizing that the money was gone, turned their attention to the only family member left who might have assets. They surrounded Sylvia, a wall of angry men demanding answers. You are the mother, one of them snarled. You signed the guest checks for the catering. You are liable for this party. I stood back, clutching the ring in my hand, the cool metal pressed against my palm, the only real thing in a room full of fakes. I watched the empire of lies crumble, brick by brick, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt the heavy weight on my chest begin to lift. The chaos of the initial revelation settled into a cold, bureaucratic efficiency, the kind of atmosphere where I thrived. I sat at one of the antique tables in the hallway, surrounded by 2 police detectives and the head of Arthur Sterling's legal team. I did not cry. I did not tremble. I laid out the digital evidence on the iPad like a royal flush. "Look at the signature on the loan application," I said, zooming in on the document. "The loops on the Y and the G are too wide. I have a very sharp, angular handwriting. That is a forgery. You can check the notary log. I was in a board meeting in Midtown when this was supposedly signed in Queens." The detective nodded, taking notes. Arthur's lawyer looked at me with a mixture of wariness and respect. By providing the metadata and the location history from my phone, I effectively severed the anchor of that $200,000 debt from my neck. The house was safe. The debt belonged to the estate of a dead man who had nothing but a leased suit and a stolen ring. The funeral director, a man who looked like he was about to have a stroke himself, approached me cautiously. He was holding a clipboard that contained an invoice for $80,000. "Mrs. Mallory," he stammered, sweating profusely. "We need to discuss the final arrangements and the payment for the services rendered today. The catering alone is—" "I did not sign any contract with you," I said, my voice flat. "My mother-in-law, Sylvia, organized this event. You can see her signature right there on the bottom line. Please direct all billing inquiries to her." "But she is saying she has no money," the director whispered. "Then I suppose you have a collections issue," I replied, turning back to the paperwork. "As for the body, I am the legal next of kin. I authorize a direct cremation, no service, no viewing, no urn, just the basic cardboard box option. But the guests, the ceremony, the show is over." I said, "Do it." Arthur Sterling approached the table next. The bluster and rage were gone, replaced by the calculating look of a man who realized he had almost lost everything. He sat down opposite me. "You found the Cayman account in 5 minutes, Arthur said, his voice low. "My forensic team would have taken weeks." "Your forensic team is paid to be thorough," I said. "I am paid to be suspicious. There is a difference." Arthur nodded slowly. "I need that money back. $2 million is not a small sum, even for me. If you can help my lawyers navigate his digital trail to recover the funds, I will make it worth your while." I looked at him. I did not blame him for being fooled. Derek was a master mirror, reflecting exactly what people wanted to see. "My consulting fee is $400 an hour," I said, "plus a 5% success fee on recovered assets." "Done," Arthur said, extending his hand. I shook it. It was the first honest transaction that had happened in this house all day. I stood up and looked across the room. The police were escorting Sylvia out. She was not leaving in handcuffs yet, but she was being detained for questioning regarding the fraud. She saw me and opened her mouth to scream, likely another curse or a plea, but the officer guided her firmly out the door. I felt a profound sense of lightness. I did not feel happy. I did not feel vindictive. I just felt like a surgeon who had successfully cut out a malignant tumor. The patient was scarred, but the cancer was gone. I looked down at the sapphire ring in my hand. It felt heavy, warm from being clutched in my palm. I took a cocktail napkin from the table and wiped the metal band, scrubbing away the sweat and the lies of the last 3 years. I slipped it onto my right ring finger. It fit perfectly. It was home. I pulled out my phone and dialed the bank's fraud department. "Yes, this is Mallory," I said, walking toward the exit. "I am reporting identity theft and credit card fraud. I need to freeze all joint accounts immediately." "Yes, the account holder is deceased." "No, I will not be paying the outstanding balances incurred this week." Near the door, Vanessa was sitting on a velvet bench, a glass of water in her hand. She looked decimated. The glow of the pregnant heiress was gone, replaced by the terror of a girl who had fallen in love with a mirage. She looked up as I passed. I am so sorry," she whispered, fresh tears spilling over. "I really didn't know. He swore to me." I stopped. I looked at her stomach, where a child was growing, a child who would never know its father, which might actually be a blessing. Get a lawyer, I said, my voice not unkind but devoid of warmth. A shark. Not your father's corporate team. You need a family law shark. You are going to need one. I pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped out into the cool evening air. The driveway was a mess of flashing red and blue lights, police sirens, and shouting reporters who had caught wind of the scandal. I walked past them all, clutching my purse, my head held high. I did not look back at the mansion. I did not look back at the body. I walked toward my beat-up sedan, ready to drive back to my real life. I slammed the heavy door of my 10-year-old sedan, shutting out the cacophony of the world outside. The screaming of the creditors, the wailing of sirens, and the frantic shouting of the reporters were instantly muffled, replaced by the familiar, quiet hum of my own safe space. The car smelled of old coffee and vanilla air freshener, a stark contrast to the cloying scent of lilies and expensive perfume that had suffocated me for the last 2 hours. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, letting the adrenaline fade into a cold, hard clarity. My hands were steady. I reached into my purse and pulled out the single piece of paper that mattered. It was the confirmation of the life insurance policy. $3 million, I whispered to the empty car. It was the only asset Derek had not been able to touch, simply because he died 3 days too soon. He had tried to give it to Vanessa. He had tried to steal this last safety net from me, just as he had stolen my grandmother's ring and my home equity. But he had failed. His own procrastination had been his final gift to me, $3 million. It was enough to pay off the fraudulent mortgage he had taken out in my name. It was enough to settle the credit card debts he had racked up. It was enough to buy my freedom 10 times over. I was not leaving this funeral a widow in debt. I was leaving as a solvent, independent woman. I looked down at my left hand. On my ring finger sat the thin gold band Derek had bought me 6 years ago. At the time, I thought it was modest because we were saving for our future. Now I knew it was cheap because I was never his priority. I rolled down the window. A rusted trash can stood on the curb, overflowing with debris from the catering trucks. I pulled the gold band off my finger. It felt light, insignificant. I tossed it out the window. It hit the metal rim of the can with a tiny, hollow clink and disappeared into the garbage. I looked at my right hand. The vintage sapphire glinted in the fading sunlight, deep and blue and real. It belonged to me. It always had. I punched an address into the GPS. It was not the address in Queens. I had known, deep down, that something was wrong for weeks. The auditor in me had sensed the collapse coming, last week, trusting that instinct. I had put a deposit down on a studio apartment in Brooklyn. It was small, but it was mine. It was a fortress where no one could forge my signature or gaslight me about my own sanity. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered once, then roared to life. As I pulled away from the curb, leaving the mansion and its chaos in the rearview mirror, I felt a hot tear slide down my cheek. I did not wipe it away. I was not crying for the man in the casket. I knew exactly who he was now. I was crying for the 28-year-old girl who had stood at an altar 6 years ago, full of hope and trust. I was mourning her. She had been naive, and she had been used. And today, she had finally died. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Sylvia. "You ungrateful witch. You cannot do this to me. I am your mother." I picked up the phone. I did not reply. I tapped the info button and scrolled down to the bottom. Block caller. The screen went dark. Sylvia was gone. Derek was gone. The debt was gone. I drove west, hugging the coastline. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of violet and burnt orange. The light caught the facets of the sapphire ring on my finger, throwing little sparks of blue fire onto the dashboard. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that finally felt clean. A smile touched my lips. It was small, But it was real. I had gone to a funeral to mourn a husband, but I had ended up burying a life I didn't even know was suffocating me. I was alone. I was scarred. But for the first time in my life, the books were balanced. I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really hope you enjoyed this journey of justice and revelation. Please leave a comment down below and let me know where you are listening from right now. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Mallory's Revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Mia Revenge Stories. Like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear this story. See you in the next one.